And then I will start with, yes. Okay, welcome everybody to this session, one of the sessions of the International Days at the Han University in Nijmegen. I hear a lot of noise at the moment. Maybe the other participants can put their mic on mute. So hello again. As said, you are now participating in the session of the value of narrative, one of the sessions of the International Days at the Han University of Applied Sciences in Nijmegen. I think in the last years we had a good tradition of these international weeks, a place where we could meet colleagues and friends and where we could listen to presentations of experts. But, well, as you all understand, we had to change the organization. That's why we have a full online program at the moment. So welcome to the participants in the inner circle, and especially welcome to Verena Tatzer, Laura Ratbone and Mike Jarrey. You are the three presenters for this session. And of course, also welcome to the other participants in the inner circle. And yeah, maybe even more important, also very welcome to the participants in the outer circle, the ones who are watching and listening to this session via our YouTube channel. This session is about the value of narratives. And about narratives, you can say that there's a long tradition of using narratives. Narratives, and some people use the word story, they are told to each other for centuries. Storytelling is known in different ways. You can tell stories about habits, about cultures, about events in daily life. So narratives are valuable, and you will hear that also in the presentations of our three presentations. It is valuable for practitioners, for therapists, for allied health professionals, but it's also valuable for research and, of course, for education. So I'm really happy with the three presenters for this session. Verena Tatzer, she will start in a few minutes and she will present how a specific method in research, narrative in action, can be used to understand people with dementia. And then the second presentation will be given by Mike Jarrey, and he will tell us about a project of the World Federation of Occupational Therapy and explain how narratives of occupations are collected and can be used to understand meaningful occupations. And the last presentation is given by Laura Ratbone, and she will present how stories of people with chronic pain can be heard and can be used as a practitioner. So I expect three exciting presentations. All the presentations are more or less 20 minutes, and the idea is that at the end of the presentations, we have 20 minutes left for a little dialogue. The technical host is Siem van Wiegen for this session, and he will take care of the interaction between the inner and the outer circle. So people who are watching via our YouTube channel, you can put your question in the chat of the YouTube channel, and Siem will take care that we, the people in the inner circle, can, well, hear and read the questions. And I think it's good also what you do right at the moment to put your microphone on mute during the presentations. I'm not sure if I told my name. Well, I will do it again otherwise. My name is Ton Satink. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the Han University here in Nijmegen. I did research myself on narrative, and it's one of my favorite topics. So that's why I am chairing this session. And that's all I have to do. Keep the time a little bit, give a little introduction. And the rest, well, that will be done by our presenters. And I would like to start with the first presentation. Verena, may I give you the floor or the screen, so to say?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. So I try to share the presentation now, and I hope you can see it. Can you see like the whole picture, or?
I can see the whole picture. Yeah.
So, oh, no, it was lost again. So second try. So now you have to see it. Yeah, so thank you for having me. And also narratives is a topic that Ton and I discussed for several years now, actually. And yeah, my name is Verena Tatzer, as Ton already introduced. I work also as a researcher and lecturer in the Department of Occupational Therapy, but in Austria. So it's a great pleasure to be part of this International Week this year. And the story, and I want to start with a story because it's about narratives. And the story that I will tell you shortly is it's derived from my research with people with severe dementia. So people living with like advanced cognitive impairment in long-term care settings in Austria. And it was part of my PhD. So the story I want to tell you shortly about is with Mr. Peters. And Mr. Peters is called Casanova by the staff in the care home where he lives, because he has had several relationships with women on the ward. He's an old man at this point of time. He's like almost 80 years old, and he lives there since a year in a dementia ward. And these like having relationships with women is like a sort of meaning for him. He's also very considerate with his fellow residents. And in this situation, I walk with him on the ward, so on the dementia ward, and a member of the staff comes with a fellow resident, and they cross the corridor. And it's a woman, and she stops and looks at Mr. Peters, and her face is rigid, and she looks like really fragile with a thin body, and the carer holds her while walking. And Mr. Peters looks in her eyes and says, "Hi, Grandma." And she just like, she's very close, like she's really close to him, and stares at him without saying anything. And the bodies are really close, approximately like 30 centimeters. And then she moves her hip, and I don't know if you can see this now, but I'll try. So what she does is like this. She moves her hip very quickly, but you know, there's no other like gesture. And Mr. Peters, he's like looking at her and says, "Oh, you like to dance?" And the carer looks at me and explains, well, you know, she used to dance a lot when she was younger. But the woman, she like still stares at Mr. Peters. And then she does this, she purses her lips like a kiss. She does like this. And Mr. Peters responds like, no, it's not possible. But he strokes her cheeks in a quite intimate and loving gesture. And the woman purses her lips again, like this, and gets a little closer. And Mr. Peters looks like to the right and to the left, and then gives her a quick kiss on the lips, like this. And then like the woman leaves. He's laughing, and the woman continues walking. And so why is this a good story? I think when we talk about using narratives to better understand people with cognitive impairment, especially with cognitive impairment that is like really severe. So people who live in a nursing home at that point of their lives. As Ton already said, narratives are universal. So all of us, we use narratives to understand human behavior, not only as health professionals, but also like as people, you know, living our everyday lives. And like, if you look into narrative theory, there are some people who suppose that there is some sort of narrative cognition even. So a special way of thinking that we use as human beings to understand human behavior. Narratives offer also a complex understanding of people that goes beyond deficit. And this is especially important when we like work or do research with people with cognitive impairment, because many of them still experience a lot of like stigma or stigmatizing and stereotypes. And if we use like qualitative inquiry, very often what people do is to have access to categories that explain, that describe things. But there's also a need for a methodology that goes deeper and explains also how things work, or how behavior or meaning or whatever, like things that we ask why can develop. And in the traditional approach of occupational science and occupational therapy, there is a group, and also Ton is part of this group, I have to say, that used to develop a special approach to understand narratives not only as stories, as told stories, but also as performed and embedded in actions. What does it mean? It means that it's not about verbal language only, as you have, maybe you could, as I've tried to use the example of Mr. Peters, it's especially useful when we do research, or also just like work as health professionals with people who have problems with verbal expression. And there's a deep and rich theoretical background also to the use of narratives. And it goes to Ricoeur, the philosopher, a French philosopher, Ricoeur. And the basic idea, or a very one example of this idea, is when people engage in an action, they produce also images that they connect with future events, but also past events, and create a possible story. So we use narratives to explain things that we experience and create meaning. And this is, I think, a very interesting thing for health professionals who work with people who are often in a crisis or transition, or even in a experience disability or other forms of changes. And why is it this especially interesting for people living with cognitive impairment? Because it's a huge group. And it's also a group that was a bit neglected in many countries. So it's a group that is growing very fast. And especially the people living with severe cognitive impairment and who have trouble expressing themselves verbally, they were neglected in research, but also I think there's a need in practice to offer these people a better way of living, and also therapy and rehabilitation. A Dutch group you may be aware of around Huber, in German it's called Huber. They also found that it's important, to use a contemporary definition of health. And I think as health professions and health researchers, the part when it comes to meaning and its relationship to well-being and health, this is something that has to be explored much more. And I think even living in this pandemic situation, it's something that we really see also in many different contexts now, that it's very difficult to live a life when many meaningful activities that we used to do are not possible at this moment. But so there is a link to health and meaning. And I think especially when dealing with people with dementia and cognitive impairment, this is something that we should focus much more. And yeah, I skipped this a little bit. So I did this for the PhD. I did a qualitative research, a long qualitative research in the ethnographic tradition using this narrative and action approach, where narratives are really not only told stories, but performed stories. So what I found is that people, even with very advanced dementia, who couldn't talk at all anymore, they did a lot of creative things to create meanings nonetheless. And they did this through activities and occupations, like the small situation that I told you in the beginning, the dance. Mr. Peters was able to interpret the dance, the movement of this woman as dancing. And he's linked this also to their culture in a way that they shared, because when they were young, like twisting was a very popular dance, and also in Austria. So it was something that he was able to recognize and to respond to, and he created a shared meaning in this situation. And despite having, like, both of them had severe cognitive problems, one of the persons, she didn't talk at all anymore. But despite all these difficulties, and also despite the fact that they lived in a very constrained institutional setting, they were able to connect and create meaning in this situation. So the message, I think, that we as health professionals should really focus on is that apparently trivial activities, very small things people do, can be loaded with symbolic meaning. And this could be really used also to support people in their changes or transitional processes. And you could call that identity work. And they also did a lot of compensatory mechanisms, like using objects, the repetition of stories, and other facts that I will just skip a little bit now. So, to discuss this a bit, there's this part of creating meaning through enacted narratives that go beyond verbal language. I think this is a very interesting contribution that occupational science and occupational therapy does, also in an interdisciplinary way. It also offers a theoretical base for practice. There are many psychosocial interventions that are based on action or even biographical interventions, like reminiscence interventions, etc. So this should be done in a more theoretically sound way. I think that you could use that. But I think also I am very fond of the idea that all health professionals and also researchers need means to understand people also with advanced dementia in a more positive and holistic way. Yeah, and this also could help us all, living in a society where many older people and also people living with cognitive impairment live. It's a good thing, that we have more people reaching a very old age. But there's also a need for society, of course, to adapt to this. And narratives, and especially enacted narratives, could be a very useful way to help us do this, and especially to untangle this symbolic meaning. And that's about it. There was a journal paper also published when you want to understand this a bit more or in depth. And yeah, and I think I'm quite well with my time. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Verena, for this very nice presentation about the use of narrative and action. Yes, you are perfectly on time. I don't know whether there are maybe questions or remarks from the inner circle. Yes, I see Marielle has a question or remark.
Yeah. First of all, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. You talked a bit about what we as occupational therapy can, and health works in general, can improve on with the use of narratives. If you had your way in 10 years, what would you have want to accomplish? What changes should be made? Do you have any concrete examples maybe?
In long-term care, you mean, or in general in society when dealing with dementia?
Well, both are very interesting.
Yeah, I think you have to, in society, you have to focus more on health promotion and regarding also with dementia to really create environments that enable people to live well in their community as long as possible. I think this is really something we have to do. And also, if people really are in need of long-term care and also maybe move to a nursing home, that they have a choice to do so, of course. And also that these kind of institutions are more open and more aware of normal activities and their importance to identity. So it has to be in a more open way.
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, so that there's in these places well, in nursing home, there's more attention to detail to everyone's individual stories and narratives?
Yes, and also the staff, you know, because I think one of the problem is that many of these institutions are understaffed, not the ones I researched because they were really good institutions, but many of them are understaffed. And then the problem is that also the staff is, you know, bored, and they also experience some occupational deprivation if their only thing is, you know, you only have to wash people or feed them, or so it's also a deprivation of this care activity. It's such an important thing. Yeah? It's also something that people like to do also when they work. But so this, I think, you know, we have to focus on both of these aspects. The staff wants meaningful occupation, you know, because they like their work more and better if they do it in a good way. And people like also, you know, have better relations when you focus on this individual occupations. So this is, it's a good means for communication and identity and, you know, having relations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I saw that Mike also has a little question, and there's still, well, let's say 4 minutes, and then it's
I'll be quick.
your own time.
Yeah, I just was thinking about just touching on some of the conversation there, really about and your comment at the end, which is so important, about seeing people with dementia in a more positive way. And perhaps I would think about that more, about seeing people with such dementia as human beings with a life story, just as we would look at ourselves and each other. And it made me think about I have students on placement sometimes in settings where they use life story work, and they tend to be using them with people who are not quite in the phase of dementia that you've been working in. And I wondered about whether the links between the two, because essentially the people that you've been working with have already been through a certain process of their, you know, cognitive decline, but also within their care pathway, shall we say. And maybe there's some link we could make on the floor of the nursing homes and in the work that people do about this life story thing. So it's not, we're not getting to the end and then suddenly having to do something different. You see what I mean?
Yes, very much so. And there's lots of possibility, and many people do this also, you know, in good care situations. I think people do it. It's not something that is not happening. It is happening, of course, also, but it's so small that people don't recognize it very often. But for the well-being of the person with dementia, I think it's huge. It's such an important thing. And that can be like being dressed. Being dressed as, like, for example, for Mr. Peters, it was important to look good, because, you know, this was so. And of course, maybe it's for you or for me, it would be important too, to be, you know, nicely dressed with as a handsome man in a way, also, not only a person with cognitive impairment, but like, you know, good-looking guy in a way.
Thank you. And I think this topic will definitely come back in the dialogue when we talk about, well, what is the value of narratives for practice, for education, and for research? So also for the people in the outer circle, the YouTube channel, think about this presentation and think about possible questions, and especially what is the value of narratives. I would now like to invite Mike Jarrey to present the project of the World Federation and your view on occupational narratives.
Okay, I'm hoping you can hear me okay. Someone give me a thumbs up. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm going to start my slide now. First of all, I'd like to thank Tom for the invite to present today. I'm Mike Jarrey. I'm from the University of Applied Sciences in Ghent in Belgium. And we have a very close working relationship with Arnhem and Nijmegen. So we are always very happy to take part in your International Week. And I was just earlier looking at what your whole university is offering, and it's really quite impressive. It's so congratulations to all of you. It's a great achievement in these current difficult times. So,
And Mike,
yeah.
thank you very much. But this is not the end, but maybe you can put your slides on full screen.
Oh, sorry,
Yes.
I thought I did that. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there
we see it in the presenting mode.
Okay.
But well, I know otherwise just go on.
I'm going to try again. Give me a second. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yes, today I'm going to talk to you about two things. But first, I'd like to start with a quote. It's from an article that really, for me, was the beginning of my interest, my own story with regards to occupational narratives. And it's from an article that, when I see how old it is now, makes me feel a bit old, if I'm honest, but it's still a really great, interesting, inspirational article. And it's by Linda Finley, and it's called From Gibbering Idiot to Iceman, Kenny's Story, a Critical Analysis of an Occupational Narrative. And one of the things that she says in there, she says many things that are really important, and I would recommend everyone read this article. One of the things she says is how it's one of our primary roles as occupational therapists to help individuals tell their stories as a route to finding their occupational identity. So she kind of suggests that we're all responsible for, in some way, helping our patients, our clients, and participants in research projects to tell their stories in order for them to understand themselves and for us to understand them and their occupational identities. So it's this quote and this article that started it all for me, and I'd recommend anyone reading it so you can understand where I'm coming from. So today I'm going to talk about two things. One is the WFOT, the World Federation of Occupational Therapists, Occupational Narratives database. And then I'm going to talk about a small study that we've done, the first one based on some of the narratives that have been uploaded to the project. And I was just thinking about this concept today about localism to globalism, think local, go global. And I think today, some of the things I'm going to talk about today fit perfectly with that when we're talking about individual narratives and stories and participating in a global project. And I think that links quite nicely with the theme of today. So the Occupational Narratives Database project is a project from the World Federation of Occupational Therapists that was, I guess, born at the World Federation Congress in Cape Town, 2018. And it truly is a global project. Here are a few of the people who were part of the original development team. And the idea was that this project was people were responsible representing every single continent that we represent within the WFOT in order to make it as global as possible. So you'll see there some of the names, some of the people that were involved with the initial project. Now, that's a screenshot of the website. I haven't got time today to show you the website and go through it, but if you haven't looked at the website yet, please go and have a look. Have a look at some of the digital stories that have been uploaded. There's lots on there at the moment, lots coming up from students and lots also from people describing but also doing their meaningful occupations. And I think you can, just by going through it and having a look at the videos, see the potential that such a project can have. I want to just talk quickly about digital storytelling. Really, it's a process that people use to create and share stories using technology. And it enables people to share those stories on things like the digital database or on YouTube or on vlogs, for example. And I like this quote from this organization in California that's really into digital storytelling, and they talk about it being the modern extension of the ancient art of storytelling, but now woven together with images and sound. And it's really important, that sound bit is really important. I'll touch on that again later. And like you said, Ton, this ancient storytelling, we're not talking about anything new here. We're talking about new ways of doing it and understanding it. Also within research, digital storytelling has had quite a lot of attention with regards to community-based participatory research in health promotion. And it's being used to increase participation in and to address non-participatory approaches to studying health problems in minority and underserved communities. So it's already got a base, it's already happening in other areas. Up until now, there's been very little use of digital storytelling, not narratives, but digital storytelling in occupational therapy. So just quickly, a little bit of a description about what an occupational narrative is. Kielhofner just talks about narratives being both the meaning we assign, so why something is meaningful to an occupational life, and also the medium through which we enact it. So it's not only a meaning, it's also a medium of which we use to communicate that meaning, perhaps. One of the things I've always liked about the narrative idea is that they offer us an opportunity to see from within. As professionals, we're also very good at saying what people can do, what is meaningful for someone. We're very good at saying, this is what you are. But actually what narratives enable people to do is to say it themselves, which is of course much more important. Finlay, a couple of ones from Finlay there again about how narratives are stories or symbolic accounts. And I like that one because often we talk about narratives, but actually sometimes they're kind of constructed by us in order for us to communicate what we want people to hear. And so they become quite symbolic for people because perhaps they are aspirational in some way. I mentioned there about a narrative can be using a verbal and non-verbal communication. Now that should say Tatzer 2017, because I wanted to just mention Verena's work because it's also a really important part of this whole discussion of narratives with people and the fact that it doesn't have to be purely verbal. And one of the benefits of digital storytelling is about the visual part as well. It's not just about the person, it's about the environment, and about the sounds that come with the things that we do. So a narrative is a story. An occupational narrative is a story about doing in someone's life. And the essence is the meaning people attach to that doing. So why occupational narratives? Again, we talked a second ago about how it helps the person to become central to the work of occupational therapists, occupational researchers, students, teachers. We often talk about the need for the client to be central in everything that we do. Having their voice central enables us to do that more. And of course, we can use that within practice models. For example, the Kawa as a river model as the metaphor for someone's life story. Moho talks about occupational identity and competency reflected in narratives. And the CMOPE, the Canadian model, offers insight into the person and their spirituality, i.e. what is meaningful to them, who are they, for example. It allows the voice of your client to be the center of your work, or part of the center of your work. And it's a great way to increase client-centeredness, and also a great way to increase participation in the process for clients, that they're together with you because they're the ones who are guiding you with their narratives. So we did a small study, and it's the first study that's come out of the Occupational Narratives Database project. It was separate from WFOT, it was part of a master's thesis. And we took 5 occupational narrative digital stories out of the database and analyzed them to look at how we as researchers, as OTs, can use digital story occupational narratives to illuminate and understand and demonstrate meaning and diversity in our occupational lives. So we took 5 stories from 5 different countries. We had a story about someone dancing in Sweden, making and repairing clothes in Japan, going to the elderly club in Belgium, a mum playing Aussie rules football in Australia, and walking to and on the beach in Spain. All of these were films made by colleagues in the WFOT development team, and they were actually films of people doing and describing the occupations as they were doing them. We used a content analysis approach. Now, why am I talking about that? Partly because this is very doable. The content analysis approach, a inductive approach, is something that I'm convinced we could all do a bit of, if that makes sense. It's something that requires some work, but not necessarily weeks and weeks of work. It's something that we specifically tried because of it being so, I don't want to use the word simple, but it's definitely not the most complicated form of qualitative research, but it works. There's two different ways. There's the deductive way, where you're trying to illuminate something or to deduce something that's not already there. But we were using the inductive approach, which is to illuminate something that's already within the data. And we used a process of abstraction, so repeated reading and watching, and we created subcategories. We turned those subcategories into main categories and then into themes. So the subcategories are known in this process as meaning units, and these tended to be quotes from the text, but they were also the latent data. So manifest data is the stuff that that's obvious, that you can take out of a digital story, of an occupational narrative. The latent data are things like the sound or gestures, things that perhaps aren't immediately obvious, perhaps things like people who are mentioned but aren't necessarily there. They are also part of the story. So this all became part of the original raw data. And then we made interpretations, and it's an important point. We made interpretations and collated them into categories. And from those categories, we created themes. We created 5 main themes. Just quickly, I'll go through them. The first one was called I Am What I Do. Theme 2 was called I Can Do, given the opportunity while contributing to others. Theme 3, to just enjoy the moment, to reflect, let time stop, and be with myself and others. Theme 4, being part of something in order to better myself and help and be with others. And finally, theme 5 was to recognize and fulfill my potential and mean something in the future to myself and others. And these were the 5 themes that we collated together from the main categories. Now, in our discussions, we recognized very quickly, and I think anyone with an occupational science can see already in those themes that there's some recognizable stuff there already about identity. I am what I do. Identity was immediate. There's in every film there was text and meaning units around identity and how people are doing something in order to give them a occupational identity. We talked about autonomy and pride and self-awareness, but also the issue around, or the theme around people and place. We noticed in all 5 studies, or in all 5 videos, that this was a recurring theme. This never kind of went away. It wasn't at one moment, it seemed to be there all the time, because obviously you have the visual element of the environment where the occupation is taking place, but it seemed that we were dealing with what we looked like from the first watch, individual occupations, but in fact you could quite easily define them as co-occupations or collective occupations. And the place played a clear role in the doing, and thus in the making of the meaning. And that's something that this visual element of the videos enabled us to understand more deeply. Just noticing my time, I'm running out of time. So we again started linking that to some of the literature in occupational therapy and occupational science. It became very clear some of Wilcox's work around doing, being, becoming, habits, transactional nature of doing, enjoying the moment, the being part, for example, belonging with networks and creating meaning with others. And then this becoming element, which was very, very clear, which was about that there was something about the future in almost everything people talked about, and how it was often a link from the past to the future, and the potential of self and the future possibilities, and of course the potential of others, especially about the mum and her children, for example. So like I said, we linked the results to lots of existing literature, and that was clear that was a real thing, that we had that in our data. So to conclude, really, this study that we've done initially demonstrates the diversity and similarities in meaning through occupation. The themes that we generated from the data reflects current thinking in occupational science and occupational therapy, and it also demonstrated the importance of people and place. So the fact that there was almost nothing that we could see that had nothing to do with other people, and how the place, the environment, and I think we know this already, but this was clear in the data, that the environment played a role in almost everything that was happening. And I just wanted to add about this visual element, but also this olfactory element, the hearing side of it. There was one of the stories where walking on the beach, and a minute of the whole 4-minute video there was no talking, there was just walking on the beach, and you could hear the waves rolling in, you could hear the seagulls, and and I just think to myself, you could talk to someone about walking on the beach all day, but then I was walking on the beach at that time, and this was the beautiful part of these digital stories, is you could almost experience that meaningful occupation with that person while they were doing it. So it's clear to us that this digital stories, digital occupational narratives, are a good way to generate what I call attractive data, interesting data that could be interesting for everybody who may or may not be interested in research, but certainly interested in helping them understand their clients' occupational identities. So really the takeaway message from my little talk now is that occupational narrative digital stories are a great way of illuminating meaning in occupation and helping us to understand what is meaningful for our clients or our research participants. So please go to the WFOT page and get involved. The potential for that database is enormous, so don't hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Really, really great to see how you have used, as you say, attractive data. Yeah, we still have time for one burning question, if there is, and otherwise we go on with the last presentation. Is this? Oh, I see Vanessa. Verena, maybe you can keep your question till the end. Vanessa.
Yes, I have a question. You use the Cabo model and the MOHO and the CMOP as one of the models. Here in the Netherlands, we also use occupational performance history interview, the OFI, as one of the ways to get like a whole story of the patient. Would you consider this to be one of like the models that we can also use to get like a better understanding of the narrative of the client as well?
That's a good question, Vanessa. And actually, perhaps I was slightly confusing in my presentation, because I used the models there really just to demonstrate that a narrative in this way can be used when using a model, and how most, if not all, models have something about the person in them. And you can use the narrative part of the model, or you can use the person part of the model as a narrative, and it can fit with your work. I guess that's what I was trying to say. So I have no doubt that the model you're talking about can be used in that way, no doubt at all.
Thank you.
Great. I also see a question from the outer circle, which is really nice that we are really connected. And I don't know, Mike, if you can see it, but I will read the question. It's a question from a physiotherapist who is asking, so if I get this right, we can pick up on certain things our patients tell us to make out how they see themselves, or how can we use this in physiotherapy? I think very nice question also because the question is, what is the value of narratives? It is presented as an occupational therapy project, but it's nice that also the physiotherapists recognize it. But what do you think, Mike? How can they use it?
Great question. I'm not a physio, so I'll try not to speak as one. I think our next colleague may be able to answer that better than me. But listen, we don't own narratives. We don't own that way of working. And I think in any healthcare profession, as Verena mentioned earlier, narratives are an important tool. And we talk very well about having our clients and our patients at the center of what we do. And I think narratives gives us a tool to enable that to happen more. So, of course, I would recommend to any allied health profession. In fact, I'd recommend it to all medical professions and beyond, definitely doctors, in order to have the voice of their patients at the center of what they do. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, and I think we should think about this more and maybe think about another session, well, within a few months, totally about narratives, and not only with OTs and PTs, but, well, try to find some more other allied health professionals, medical doctors, maybe also clients. There's also a comment from Maria Capanacci. Question: have you considered to make a digital collective narrative? And
yes,
that's the last question
you,
for this time, and then we go on.
I'll be honest with you, in the beginning, I hadn't thought about that, but after this study, absolutely. And in a way, there's a couple of the narratives on there were kind of collective narratives because there was other people involved in them. Because the one in Japan, for example, the lady in the video, and all these videos are to watch on the database, by the way. The lady in the video is sat in her home, and her husband's there, and her son is there, and you know, and she's talking about how she fixes clothes for people, and you can't get away from the collective part of it. So in a way, it's the natural next step is to start thinking about collective narratives. Absolutely, yeah.
Good. Thank you very much, Mike, for this inspiring presentation. And I think this is a project with a great future for OTs, but also for other professions. So thank you. And I would like to move on to Laura Ratbone. The last presentation. Laura, may I give you the screen?
Hello everybody, thank you very much for inviting me along to be part of this, and I have to say, listening to these first two talks I feel somewhat out of my depth, but hopefully we can have an interesting experience and something beautiful will come out of it. So I will start sharing my screen, but I have to be honest, there's not a huge amount of, well, no, let's see how it goes. So right. Oh, what can you see right now? Does that work? Are you seeing my presentation slide, or are you seeing my full slide?
Full slide.
The full slide. Okay.
Good.
Right. So my name is Laura Rathbone, and I am a consultant neuromusculoskeletal physio. And what that means is that I work out in an area of physiotherapy that's dedicated to collaborating with people experiencing really complexly presenting persistent pain. And I've been thinking about things like communication and therapeutic alliance and how we can connect to each other for a while now. And what I see in our profession is this kind of struggle, this kind of gap that exists between the person in pain and the person or the therapist that is sort of tasked with understanding that pain and finding an appropriate way of moving forwards through rehabilitation, or a kind of journey to figuring out how to live well with pain, or even figuring out what sort of approaches to treatment might be appropriate in modifying pain. And what we're understanding about pain now is that it's not so much a sensation of the tissues, but a perception or a conscious experience that's coordinated across so many different dynamical systems of the body. And so there is this real sort of, I suppose, need for physiotherapists to understand more about what it is to be human and to be a human in pain. And so there is this kind of struggle between how we're trained and this kind of third person objective assessment of somebody's pain, and then this kind of experience of pain and understanding what it is to be in pain. So I spent a lot of time trying to sort of reach out to philosophy and to psychology and to our occupational therapy colleagues who are already doing such a great job of this. So just to make sure that as physios we recognise that there is a beautifully placed professional team out there who are doing a lot of this work already. But Elaine Scarry wrote a book back in the 80s called The Body in Pain and the Making and Unmaking of the World. And there's this really interesting quote, and it's quite famous now, but to have great pain is to have certainty. To hear that another person has pain is to have doubt. And I think this is what we're very often seeing play out in our clinical relationships. And it's certainly what we get as feedback quite often from people who are going through the MSK care sort of area of the healthcare system from a therapeutic perspective. And so there is these issues around disbelief and around epistemic injustice. And if you've been able to see Gilletta Belton speak, and I believe she spoke earlier today, please do go and give that a watch, because she so beautifully explores and explains and is so generous with her experiences to help us understand that there is a disbelief that is coming across in our communication from the therapist, from the stance of the therapist, and perhaps we need to understand that a little bit more. And I wonder whether narratives and allowing ourselves to hear narratives might be a way of us starting to close that gap and understand that struggle a little bit more. So then you're thinking, well, what does it mean to hear a narrative, to hear a story, to be in the presence of pain, and what does that require of us as individuals? And so I would like to share a text with you, and it's quite a long text, and I will read it. And if it's all right, and if it's possible, if you're willing to go along with me in this, can I ask that you, if you're able to, could you maybe experience this reading with your eyes closed? And if that's not available to you, I have written the text up on the next slide so that you can read the text along. But if you're able to, maybe just really try to get a sense of it. And it is a long text, so if you can stay with me, I would really appreciate it. And it begins like this. Vulnerability is not a weakness, a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a choice. Vulnerability is the underlying, ever-present and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. To run from vulnerability is to run from the essence of our nature. The attempt to be invulnerable is the vain attempt to become something we are not, and most especially to close ourselves off our understanding of the grief of others. More seriously, in refusing our vulnerability, we refuse the help needed at every turn of our existence and immobilize the essential, tidal, and conversational foundations of our identity. To have a temporary, isolated sense of power over all events and circumstances is a lovely, illusionary privilege. perhaps the prime and most beautifully constructed conceit of being human, and especially of being youthfully human. But it is a privilege that must be surrendered with that same youth, with ill health, with accident, with the loss of loved ones who do not share our untouchable powers eventually and most emphatically given up as we approach our last breath. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger, more courageous, more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely as missers and complainers, reluctant and fearful, always at the gates of existence, but never bravely and completely attempting to enter, never wanting to risk ourselves, never walking through the door fully. Just before we come away from that, just take a moment to notice what feeling is sat within you as you consume or embrace those words in that text, thinking about what it is to be human and vulnerable, and what it is to be perhaps deluded around our control of vulnerability. This was a text written by David White in his book Consolations, if you're interested in reading more. But I think what's really sort of beautifully put here, and what this text has the opportunity, gives us the opportunity to learn, is that vulnerability and the sort of vulnerability is this sort of innate human experience that we all have, but perhaps we sometimes have this illusionary idea that we can sort of close off our vulnerability or somehow be invulnerable. And I'm interested in this as a concept because I think this is sometimes what is happening in our professional training as we aspire to this professionality, this somehow this barrier that starts to exist between clinician and patient, as we start to, I don't know, maybe delude ourselves or somehow try to let this concept of humanness disappear or fizzle out as we take up this professional stance as clinician, and that within that, because we're rejecting our own vulnerability in this clinical relationship, we're somehow rejecting the vulnerability of somebody else. And this brings me to the work of Professor Dan Sahavi, who is a phenomenologist. I've been practicing that word, out of the University of Copenhagen. And he has probably like one of the most awesome jobs. He works in a center for subjectivity. So he's thinking about how humans move around their world and interact with objects and experiences. And phenomenology, I mean, literally the clue is in the word, in the title. It's the study of phenomena. It's a movement and a discipline within philosophy that is studying phenomena, so the appearance of things as they appear in our experience. So it's the way that we experience things, really unique to that moment in time, and the sort of embodied and embedded and enactive and ecologicalness of how we navigate this world. So what that means is the full experience, the physiological experience and conscious experience of being human within a society, within an environment, and how all of those things play a sort of contextual role in how we construct meaning. And he talks about empathy as a basic human experience, and has been doing quite a lot of work within the nursing literature where they're theorizing empathy and training empathy, and this ability to connect with and understand this other person's experience. And he argues for a different way of understanding empathy, rather than a kind of cognicizing or theorizing. He sort of asks us to explore that almost that sort of unconscious reaction, that sort of that deeply human reaction to witnessing somebody else's suffering. And so we'd like to try and give a bit of an example of that. So I know that there are other people on the inner circle. So if it's possible, I'd really like you to open up your mics for this next slide. And I'm aware of time, so but if you could open up your mics, and as I bring in this next slide, I'd like you to just think about what it means for you to see this next slide and what comes up into your mind, and how you're reacting to it, if that would be okay. And if you feel comfortable enough, I would really like it if you would share that with us, but you're under no obligation to do so, of course. So I'm going to bring up this next slide, and I'd like you to take a moment just to really, what is it like to see this image? And I can't see you, so I have no idea if you're actually doing this. But if you're having a reaction, or if you're having thoughts or feelings, and you feel like you could share that with the group, I'd really appreciate it. So just go for it.
I feel my body stiffening just by looking at it.
Yeah, nice. Thank you very much.
I can say too, it's Frida Kahlo, right? It's
Yeah.
a hugest pain from the inside, and you can feel this pain very strongly, I think.
Yeah, and what does that feel like?
This feels like when you cannot just you need to follow living, but you cannot live anymore.
Yeah,
it's like something, it's a pain that has no bottom, no the biggest line, like.
Yeah. And as you're experiencing that, what do you feel in terms of your connection to either the image, the person depicted in the image, or the person that made the image?
I find this sort of picture renders me kind of speechless, which is kind of ironic, really. But sometimes I just don't have words for it, because it's clearly traumatic. Here the words are coming now, but I look at it and I'm a bit like Verena touched on that frozen feeling, frozen initially.
Yeah, thank you everybody for sharing. I think what you've just done there very beautifully is connect to that first feeling of what it's like to see somebody in pain, or to see somebody's pain. And what we're sort of trying to get across here, and perhaps I'm hoping that this comes across, is that we're trying to get that feeling back, what it is like to be a human, without necessarily thinking, well, why do they have pain, and what is the meaning of that pain? So if I was to show this, and I do show this regularly to a group of physios, and very often what comes up, or MSK practitioners, what comes up immediately is trying to decontextualize or deconstruct what are the images that we're seeing here, like what does it mean? And physios love to observe a phenomena in a human and then try to create some kind of therapeutic meaning from it, because that's what we're trained to do. We take the position of the third person observer, and we are the from that stance we hold the ability to translate action observed in others into a kind of diagnostic meaning. So for example, the pins in the skin might represent to us pins and needles, and we might start thinking something along the lines of, oh, neuropathic pain or something like that, and we would start to construct meaning. And there's an empathy within that, but that's what might be termed more like a cognitive approach to empathy, or a theorizing of empathy. But what you've all beautifully demonstrated is this sort of immediate feeling, and I really wanted us to get to that. So thank you very much for opening up your vulnerability and sharing that. I think this is something that we are trying to develop within ourselves as clinicians, but perhaps sometimes we're coming at it from a kind of training perspective or an algorithm perspective, this idea of learning how to be empathetic. But I think what we could be coming at this from is a position of witnessing, and rather than a position of observing in order to make meaning, what if we were to scale this back and think of this more like witnessing? So to bear witness is to bear witness of the truth, to acknowledge that something is real, something is there, and this idea of witnessing. To bear witness is to believe, and this is important within the experience of pain. If we go back to that Elaine Scarry quote, where to observe or to hear of another person's pain is to introduce doubt. But if we were to embrace this position of witnessing and that basic empathic response to hearing somebody else's suffering, and allow that to have space within our clinical relationship to flourish, I think it may well help us to creating those strong, collaborative, and equitous relationships within therapy for pain that we sometimes struggle to create. And I wonder if it's something to do with this idea of professionality, like vulnerability is a sort of really deep human sort of skill. Is that right? I don't know. Experience, ability. And yet our clinical roles are trained and acquired and systematized skills. And so as we move into that clinical role, and in the UK it might be that you put your uniform on in the morning, and that serves the I suppose the narrative of professionality. It serves the taking up of a barrier between the human that's underneath the uniform, that's behind that symbol, and the person that's entering into care. And so we're sort of now entering into this strange place where we're training people on how to be compassionate. And Dan Zahavi would take a different perspective here. I would think from his reading, but I wouldn't want to speak for him, to say that actually this vulnerability, this compassion is something that we already have. We don't need to train it, because we may well end up training over this sort of natural human ability to connect and to bear witness and to appropriately empathize and feel a kind of response to somebody else's struggling. And so maybe by having an understanding that empathy is not so much a communication skill or a communication strategy or something we can theorize, but it's more like a feeling skill that we all have, that we want to allow or permit into our therapeutic moments, and these dyads that we're creating in order to support someone to live well or to find relief if that's possible. So just thinking about how we can create these training skills, or how we can create moments where clinicians allow themselves to be vulnerable, allow that vulnerability into their professional identity, and merge and blend those boundaries, so that when somebody does feel able to share their narrative of pain, or they are reaching out to us in that desperation for support, rather than us having to theorize over, well, what is the meaning of these symptoms, and why might they have them, which is a problem within pain, because we don't fully understand why somebody has chronic pain. So there is a space for doubt if we're using sort of the more traditional biomedical model of medicine and physiotherapy, because there may well not be an observable or measurable pathoanatomical source for their pain. And so it almost, that doubt is being given lots of space. But if we're able to I don't know, redesign how we train MSK clinicians to understand pain as a human experience, as a coordinated, conscious experience that is made up of many aspects of our multi-system, and allow space within that communicational dyad for this sort of basic empathy, this, what does it feel like in me to hear your suffering, and how can I connect to you more through that? We may well just start to have better development and delivery of care services. And so I keep coming back to this idea that, you know, empathy and hearing painful narratives, the hearing of the narrative gives the opportunity for empathy, and empathy is a basic human skill that we just need permission to allow into our practice. So thank you. I hope that was thought stimulating, and maybe started to bring up some ideas for clinical practice. I don't know, but thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Laura. Really interesting how you used narratives, a painful narrative, in another way, on a certain point, and how you connected also with the education of professionals. I don't know if there are some questions to Laura. I see that Maria is having a question. Yes. Let's first have one or two questions specifically to Laura, and then open up the dialogue. So Maria.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. And I have one question. It's about these competencies that we need to have, like healthcare professionals, and also basic empathy, because it is said that the empathy is not very helpful during the ethical decision making. For example, if you work in the urgencies or emergencies and so on. So it's like a quite, but you are speaking about basic empathy that is related to the self-knowledge. Mm-hmm. And as a skill, you know, if you are putting this into practice, I guess it should be something that should be an advanced empathy, but not just the reaction, empathetic reaction, and or living with a person or connecting to a person in situ, that will really that can cause this difficulties in ethical decision making. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's a really great question, and I think the hard part, and this is I think one of the main challenges that I mean, I only speak for physiotherapists, and really only my experience of physiotherapy and what I hear from the students and the clinicians that I work with. But you know, the problem with physiotherapy is, I think, that we sit across so many different aspects of healthcare. So if we're working out in urgent care, say for example, we're triaging, I don't know whether physiotherapists do triage out here in the Netherlands, but certainly in the UK there are some more urgent care roles for physiotherapists where we're really needing to use established biomedical knowledge to decide, okay, this is in an acute setting, what is the most appropriate next action in terms of management of injury. Certainly that works out on the sports field as well. But there is also an element of the using biomedical knowledge, but then also maintaining human connection, because what we're learning now about pain so much more is that it is a coordinated experience, conscious experience across the human that is embedded within, you know, the contextual environment within which the pain has been brought forth. So let's say, for example, you're in an injury state, the contextual bits of information that are important there that can change how pain shows up, may respond really well to a moment of human connection and validation and acknowledgement, even within that acute setting. Because, you know, things like, say, for example, if we are in an urgent setting and there is a huge amount of raging pain and we need to go into a biomedical model of care, so we need to go into some kind of injury management, actually painkillers, well, there's no such thing as a painkiller because we don't know where the pain comes from, so we don't know how to kill it. What we're essentially doing is just anesthetizing people in order to drop their coordinated experience of pain. But maybe we could connect on a human level, and maybe there is some more power in that way. And I think the sort of over theorizing of somebody's experience sometimes just doesn't leave enough space for this kind of, I see you're in pain, I understand, I feel that as a human, I can feel and connect to the fact that you are in pain, in a sort of in the moment kind of empathic thing. And but there is a sort of a need in that more biomedically dominated area of medicine to be able to create good decisions. Yeah, I understand. Out in chronic pain, we're in a different place.
And Laura, if I may add to this, I also hear that you see the value of a narrative to get out of the biomedical perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's also in a way how Verena and how Mike showed the value of narrative, that a narrative is much more about a biomedical issue. And you can even say, well, if you look to the biomedical theories and models, that's quite reductionistic. It's about numbers, it's about diseases, and of course, a disease has a certain meaning for a person. But if you take it, well, or look at it from a much broader perspective, from a human or a narrative perspective, yes, then you have the connection. And then I see also the connection with empathy and with being a human.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of the issue there as well, is to bear witness to somebody else's suffering and pain is in itself a very difficult experience to have and to go through. And so an element, I think, of compassion training and is almost like a protective training strategy. But I sometimes wonder whether we're over theorizing what is actually a basic human lived experience, and by theorizing it and strategizing it, we're taking away its most powerful component.
I would like to move away a little bit from the pain, although it's very interesting, but maybe we should organize a whole session about pain. I would like to go back to the central topic of this session, to narratives. And the title of this session is The Value of Narratives. So my question as a starting point for the dialogue is, what is the value of narrative for education, for research, for practice? Maybe somebody would like to start.
Yeah, I could. I mean, it's just also thank you for this nice presentation. I think it's like connecting so beautifully all the three, because I think like the narrative can be the bridge to all of these topics, to better understand human experiences, whatever it may be, in a very complex way. I think this is what if you want to see how can I use it in practice, I think this is a very, very important thing. And when you use narratives, you don't distance yourself also, because you are part of the narrative, you are part of the situation, you are part of, this thing that you create together. Someone tells you a story, you are listening, you're doing something together in a certain context. So I think this is also a good way of looking at it, because it helps remaining human and not becoming like a medical profession and, distance yourself too much to it. So I think this is why it's so interesting. Yeah, you can use it in so many different ways, but it's also it's really a tool that you can use, to stay human in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's really good what you say. It's a tool to stay human. Huh? If I think about education, we educate allied health professionals. A question, well, to all of you, because this is a mix of lecturers, researchers, and students. What do you think? Can we use narratives in education? And maybe specifically the project that Mike presented. Can we use it in education for bachelor students?
Well, maybe speaking as a bachelor student.
Yes, great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we most certainly can. Well, I was listening to like all of your stories and it was very interesting. And it's also, I recognize some things because, well, when we're still learning like what whole occupational therapy is about, of course. But what has been from the start has been a main point is to look at the person in front of you, to look at them and apply your whole everything you're going to do after that to that person to make it the most effective. Because if you see someone and if you if you see the way they do things, you can help them in the best way, because not everybody making a cup of coffee, it sounds like such a usual thing to do, but everyone has their own way and everyone does it differently. So I really think that to connect it with Mike's project, I think it could be really interesting to just have that one activity, make a cup of coffee, and see how so many different people, do such a thing and see the differences and really get that understanding of, all those different aspects. And yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Marielle. I remember that Mike, you used the word you have to recognize, or you can recognize, you can understand. Huh? And I think that's also what you talk about, Marielle.
There's a couple of videos on there already of just people making a cup of tea or coffee, I think, and that's as relevant as driving a Ferrari. This is the beauty of narratives. No one can say what isn't relative if it's for you something important and meaningful. And this is really the crux of the matter, I think, because just Laura, you mentioned earlier about clinicians putting on their white jackets. What narratives do or can do is address power dynamics. There's a huge problem in healthcare about power. There's this kind of hierarchical system that we work in, and we all know about it, and narratives can bring it down to what you've just called this kind of usual everyday boring stuff. But what are we all here for? We're here to enable people to do their usual everyday boring stuff. And this addresses the power dynamics, and we're there doing it, and I think that's really important. And we mustn't kind of be apologetic or think it's sad or think it's a bit embarrassing. This is exactly what people want. They want to be able to do the normal everyday stuff still.
Yes, thank you. Yeah,
and I
also see.
Sorry, Tan.
I also see a remark from Maria. You say narrative is a core for client-centered or person-centered practice. So maybe you can explain a bit more about it.
I think that as Verena was saying, right, also a narrative in action could be an understanding or explanation of a nice addition to explain real client-centered practice, because it's like a basis. I think that the basis of the connection to the other. And this basis you can feel only through narratives, and you can feel it. And also in education, for example, you have posed this question about the education, and in education you can also teach these client-centered practices through the narratives. And also connecting to the Laura's, we work a lot with the students, and they need to explore their own narratives too, and exploring their own narratives helps also this phenomenological feeling, right? that of my inner reality, my occupation that I'm doing every day. And if I'm going deeper into these skills, I can really accompany the other person too. So this is a double like interplay, and what I'm observing and what I'm observing in my own reality.
It's really important what you say, Maria, about students understanding their own narratives. And there are, I think, partly because of the COVID situation, there are lots of student videos on the project at the moment. Loads came in from the US recently. There's a couple from Nijmegen actually, and it's students exploring their own narratives. And it's great. It's great. It's one of the goals of the project. It's not the only goal. We want to see and understand narratives happening as well. But there's lots of great stuff about students and how they've had to adapt their occupations because they're at home, and understanding this kind of occupational adaptation or occupational alienation that's happening at the moment.
And based on what you say, Mike, I can even imagine that on the website you make certain categories of occupational narratives. Like now, if you say that there are some occupational narratives related to the pandemic,
Yeah.
I can imagine that, well, in several ways you can group them.
Yeah, there's one group called Doing Things Differently Due to COVID-19. There's one group called Everyday Occupations. There's one called Doing Things with Others. And actually, you know, I'm a bit not cynical, but you could click on all of them in many. It helps to categorize and help with the search function, because the idea is you can search on categories as well as countries and as well as the names of the videos. Yeah.
Yes. Laura, I interrupted you a few minutes ago. Is it still valuable what you want to share? Otherwise,
I was probably going to say something very similar to what Maria said, so I appreciate your comment there. And just to say that I don't think we're ever really using narratives. We're always in the process of building narratives, and whatever moment we're building them, especially within education, I think there is this sort of almost didactical idea in many elements of our education that we can just give people a narrative and they will take it up. But what we're sort of struggling against there is that these people, like, you know, already have beliefs and truths about the world and themselves. And so what we're really wanting to create is moments of experience for people to build up their own narrative and then be able to facilitate that in clinical experiences and in clinical moments where we start to build this shared narrative or shared meaning. So just to echo all of that, I think that was lovely.
yes. Thank you. I think it's good to go to an end, also because I think that the Zoom meeting will stop at 3:30. I would like to thank the three presenters for their three really inspiring, totally different presentations, and I think you all showed how well beautiful narratives are, how it can help us to recognize, first of all, to recognize the human, to recognize and understand the doing, well, the activities of daily life. And as Laura really explained in a good way, narratives also helps us to go away from the biomedical thinking and really look to our patient again as a human being who likes to be active, to do things. And well, maybe in the beginning and at the end, it helps also students and professionals to understand themselves. So narratives, the value of it is is clear, I would say, for education, for practice, and for research. Thank you very much. And for all the participants, what you now have seen is the live stream, but you can go to the YouTube channel later on also to